The air in the lobby of the Grand Hotel was thick with a specific kind of luxury. It wasn't just the smell of polished wood and fresh lilies in crystal vases. It was the smell of quiet money, of old families and important deals whispered over bone china teacups. Soft light fell from towering crystal chandeliers, glinting off the gold leaf that edged the ceiling and warming the deep red of the Persian carpets. People sat in high-backed velvet chairs, the gentle murmur of their conversations mixing with the delicate clink of silver spoons against porcelain. In the center of it all, like a king on its throne, sat the piano, a magnificent, ebony black grand piano, its surface a mirror reflecting the room's opulence, and at its keys, a man in a perfectly tailored tuxedo moved with gentle precision. This was the resident pianist, a man who had played here for 30 years. He played beautiful, familiar pieces, smooth Gershwin melodies, gentle Debussy atmospheres. His music was like another piece of the furniture, expensive, tasteful, and designed to be noticed without ever being truly heard. It was the sound of background elegance. The main doors to the street opened occasionally, letting in a burst of evening chill and the distant city noise, which was always quickly swallowed by the lobby's warm hush. Through these doors, as the pianist began a familiar Scott Joplin rag, a young woman slipped inside. She was immediately out of place, not because she caused a scene. She was utterly silent, but because her very presence seemed to absorb the light instead of reflecting it. Her coat was a faded navy blue, worn thin at the elbows and too large for her slender frame. Her dark hair was pulled back into a simple, practical braid. She carried no purse, no shopping bags from the fancy boutiques that lined the street outside. She simply stood just inside the doorway, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets, as if unsure whether the floor would permit her to walk on it. Her eyes, however, were not unsure. They were fixed on the piano with an intensity that was almost physical. She didn't look at the glittering chandeliers or the gilt-framed paintings. She watched the pianist's hands. She didn't sway to the jaunty ragtime rhythm. She seemed to be studying, dissecting each movement. An older couple sitting nearby noticed her. The woman, draped in a silk scarf, nudged her husband and gave a slight, disapproving nod in the young woman's direction. The husband peered over his newspaper, his gaze lingering for a moment on her worn shoes before he shrugged and went back to his reading. The message was clear. She was a curiosity, a smudge on the perfect picture, probably lost, or maybe looking for a bathroom. She'd move on soon, but she didn't move on. As the ragtime piece ended and the pianist shifted into something slower, more melancholic, a Chopin nocturne, she took a few steps forward. She moved like a shadow, drifting closer to the source of the music, stopping near a towering potted fern that offered a little cover. Her head tilted slightly, her eyes closed for just a second, and her lips moved silently. She wasn't just listening, she was communing. The pianist finished the nocturne with a soft, fading chord. He stood, gave a small, practiced bow to the scattering of polite applause, and placed a back in 15 minutes sign on the piano lid. He walked towards a staff door, nodding at the Mactor D, a stern-looking man in a black suit who stood guard near the entrance to the hotel's famed restaurant. This was the moment. The young woman watched the empty piano bench. It seemed to pull at her. She took a deep breath, a breath that seemed to steel her for a battle, and walked towards the Mactor D. Her steps were quiet on the thick carpet. The Mactor D saw her coming, and his posture stiffened. He was used to shooing away tourists who wanted a photo with the piano. But this girl didn't look like a tourist. "Excuse me, sir," she said. Her voice was low, a little rough from the cold outside, but clear. "Yes," he replied, his tone making it clear this was not an invitation to converse. She didn't look at his face. Her gaze was locked on the grand piano behind him. "I saw the pianist is taking a break." "He is. The music will resume shortly." She swallowed. "I can play." A faint, almost imperceptible sigh escaped the Mactor D. "The position is not open. I assure you." "No, that's not." She finally lifted her eyes to his. They were a startlingly deep brown, and in them, he saw no guile, only a desperate, piercing earnestness. "I don't want a job, not like that. I mean, if I play for you, a piece, right now, on that piano." She paused, gathering her courage. Could I have a plate of food? From the kitchen, anything. It doesn't matter." There was a beat of silence. Then the Mactor D blinked, his professional composure cracking for a second into pure, unvarnished disbelief. A plate of food. This wasn't a medieval tavern. This was the Grand. A tinkling laugh came from the velvet chairs to their right. The woman in the silk scarf had been listening, She covered her mouth with a delicate hand, her eyes bright with amusement. Her husband chuckled low into his newspaper. A young man at a small table, typing on his laptop, looked up, heard the exchange, and smirked, shaking his head before returning to his screen. The giggle was like a spark. It caught a few other patrons, who had overheard the odd request, exchanged smiling glances. The tension in the luxurious air evaporated, replaced by a shared, condescending entertainment. The poor thing was clearly unwell, or a performance artist, or simply deluded. The Mactor D felt a pang of something, not sympathy at first, but irritation at the disruption. Yet, looking at her, he didn't see a troublemaker. He saw the raw nerve of hunger in her cheeks, the slight tremor in her hands that she tried to hide by clenching them at her sides. It was a pathetic, bizarre proposal, but it was also, strangely, without malice. He wanted her gone before the pianist returned and before the manager noticed. The quickest way, he decided, was to let her embarrass herself. The laughter would die, she would play a clumsy chopsticks or falter after a few bars, and then she would leave, defeated and quiet. "Fine," he said, his voice flat. "You can play 5 minutes, and then you will leave, understood?" He emphasized the last word, pointing a finger gently but firmly towards the door. A fresh wave of whispers and suppressed smiles rippled through the lobby. This was better than the usual evening ambience, a real-life little drama. The young woman didn't seem to hear the laughter anymore. She just nodded, a quick, sharp movement. "Thank you," she whispered, though it was unclear if she was thanking him for the chance or for the promised food. She walked towards the grand piano. The journey across the open floor felt endless under the gaze of 2 curious, amused eyes. She reached the instrument. For a moment, she just stood beside it, not touching it. She looked at the pristine, ivory keys. Then, she did something odd. She shrugged off her oversized coat, folding it with surprising neatness and placing it on the floor beside the bench. Underneath, she wore a simple, gray wool sweater, threadbare at the cuffs. She sat down. The contrast was almost comical. The majestic, gleaming instrument of kings and concert halls, and this slight, shabby figure perched on the edge of its bench. She adjusted the stool slightly, her movements economical. She placed her hands in her lap, closed her eyes, and took one more deep, centering breath that lifted her shoulders and then let them fall. The audience waited. A man at the back took a silent video on his phone, a smirk playing on his lips. The woman with the scarf leaned forward, ready for the comedy. Her hands came up. They were not the soft, manicured hands of the usual pianist. They were slender but strong, with short, practical nails, and across the knuckles there were faint scars and calluses that spoke of hard work, but not of housework. They were the hands of someone who had gripped things tightly for a long, long time. She hovered them over the keys for a heartbeat, then she let them fall. The sound that came out was not a note. It was a deep, resonant boom, a low G that vibrated through the floor and into the bones of everyone in the room. It was not loud, but it was full. It was a sound that commanded the very air to stop moving. And then, the second hand joined, not a melody, but a cascade of notes, a complex, swirling, stormy torrent of sound that rose from that single boom. It was Chopin, but not the polite, tinkling Chopin of background music. This was Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. It was a story of rebellion, heartbreak, and towering passion, and she was not playing it. She was tearing it from the piano's heart. The smirk vanished from the phone holder's face. The newspaper in the husband's hands was forgotten, the pages slipping to his lap. The woman in the silk scarf's amused expression froze, then melted into open-mouthed astonishment. The young woman on the bench was gone. In her place was a conductor of storms. Her body, so still before, now moved with the music a lean into an aching phrase, a slight recoil from a crashing chord. Her face was a mask of fierce concentration and profound feeling. The complicated, lightning-fast runs up and down the keyboard were executed with a blinding clarity, every note a pearl on a string. The quiet, lyrical section sang with a tenderness that made several people's breath catch. The Mactor D stood rooted to his spot, his professional disdain replaced by sheer shock. He knew music. He'd heard the resident pianist play this very piece, competently, pleasantly. This was different. This was alive. This was dangerous and beautiful, and it filled the vast lobby completely, silencing not just the giggles, but every thought that wasn't tied to. The last note of the Chopin Ballade did not simply fade. It seemed to shatter, a final, brittle chord that left a physical silence hanging in the air of the Grand Hotel's lobby. It was the kind of silence that has weight and texture. It pressed on the eardrums of everyone present. For a long moment, nothing moved. The young woman at the piano kept her head bowed, her hands resting lightly on the keys as if drawing the last whisper of sound from them. Her shoulders rose and fell with a single, deep breath. The transformation was over. The fierce, commanding presence that had possessed her for those 5 minutes receded, leaving behind the same slight, shabby figure in the worn gray sweater. She slowly lifted her hands and placed them in her lap, staring at them as if they belonged to someone else. Then, a single, sharp sound broke the spell. Clap. It was a solitary, deliberate clap from the back of the room. It came from the man who had been typing on his laptop. His device was now forgotten on the small table. His face was pale, his eyes wide with something beyond surprise, with a kind of awe he had no way to process. That one clap was like a stone dropped into a still pond. The ripple began. The older couple was next. The husband, his newspaper a forgotten heap at his feet, began to applaud, slowly at first, then with growing strength. His wife, the one in the silk scarf who had first giggled, brought her hands together without any of her usual delicate grace. Her eyes were glistening. She wasn't clapping for a performance. She was bearing witness to something she knew she had misunderstood, and the applause was an apology as much as praise. Then, it became a wave. Every person in those velvet chairs, every staff member who had paused in the doorway to the kitchens, the concierge behind his polished desk, all of them rose. There was no cheering, not in the grand, but the applause was thunderous in its own restrained, powerful way. It filled the space that the music had just vacated, a roaring, human sound of respect. The young woman flinched at the noise, as if it were a physical blow. She looked up, her eyes scanning the room full of standing, clapping people. There was no triumph in her face. Instead, she looked confused, almost frightened, like a wild animal startled by a sudden light. Her gaze darted to the Master D. He was still standing exactly where she had left him, his arms limp at his sides. His face had gone from stern professionalism to shock, and now to a dawning, horrible understanding. He had offered a starving artist a crumb, and she had built a cathedral. His eyes met hers. In that instant, any thought of the promised plate of food, of the 5 minutes and then you leave rule, evaporated. He gave a small, stiff nod, a gesture of surrender to a power he did not comprehend. But before he could move, another figure was striding across the carpet. It was the resident pianist. He moved quickly, his usual calm dignity gone. His tuxedo jacket was unbuttoned, and his face was a mask of intense, almost painful emotion. He reached the piano just as the young woman was beginning to push herself up from the bench, her movements slow and drained. He didn't speak to her at first. Instead, he looked down at the piano keys, as if he could see the ghost of the notes she had played still shimmering there. Again, he said, his voice hoarse. It wasn't a command, but a plea. She looked at him, bewildered. "Your hands," he said, his eyes fixed on her fingers. "The way you shaped the phrase in the coda, the rubato in the second theme." He was speaking more to himself than to her, his words tumbling out. "It's not just technique, it's a voice, a specific voice." He finally looked directly at her, his gaze searching her face with an urgency that was uncomfortable. "Who taught you?" The applause around them was finally dying down, people lowering themselves back into their seats. But the attention in the room was now a laser beam focused on the two figures by the piano. The entire lobby was leaning in, listening. "No one," she whispered. Her voice was barely audible, scraped raw by the emotional storm of her playing. "I mean, not anymore." The pianist shook his head, a violent, jerky motion. "No, that is a lie. That interpretation, it is taught. It is passed down. It is not in any book." He took a step closer, and his voice dropped, trembling. "The left-hand melody in the *Piomoso* section. You gave it a singing quality, a lament. I have heard that only once before in my life. At a competition in Prague, 22 years ago, a young woman from the East played the same piece. She did not win first prize. The judges said her playing was too emotional, too wild, but everyone who heard her knew they had witnessed a future legend. She made the piano weep, just as you did." He saw the color drain from the young woman's face. Her breath hitched. She took a small step back, but the piano bench was behind her. "What is your name?" the pianist asked, each word precise and heavy. She hesitated. The room was utterly silent again. The name, when it came, was a soft exhale. "Lena." The pianist's eyes widened. "Lena," he repeated, testing the sound. Then he pressed. "Your full name." She closed her eyes for a second, as if knowing that saying it would change everything. "Volkov," she whispered. "Lena Volkov." The reaction was immediate and physical. The pianist stumbled back as if she had struck him. His hand flew to his chest. A low gasp escaped from the Mactor, who had crept closer. From the seated crowd, the woman in the silk scarf let out a small, sharp cry, her hand flying to her mouth. "Volkov." The pianist breathed. The name, a sacred and terrible word. Anya Volkov. The Volkova Kadinza. They still talk about it in the conservatories. They said she reinvented the Rachmaninoff. His eyes bored into Lena's, seeing the past in her present. "You are her daughter." It was not a question. It was a statement that landed in the silent room with the finality of a stone slab. Lena simply nodded once. A single tear escaped, tracing a clean path through the dust on her cheek. That tear was a confession more powerful than any words. It confirmed a tragedy the musical world had gossiped about for a decade. Anya Volkov, the blazing comet of a pianist, had vanished at the height of her career after a car accident in Europe. There were rumors of injury, of retreat, but no facts. She had simply disappeared, and her silence had become her final, mysterious composition. The pianist, his own eyes now bright with tears, looked from Lena's threadbare sweater to her desperate, hungry face. The monstrous puzzle pieces clicked together. The heir to a royal musical lineage was standing in a hotel lobby, playing for a meal. "Your mother?" he asked, his voice cracking. Lena's composure, held together by the sheer force of the music, finally broke. Her chin trembled. "She is sick," she said, the words thick with a pain that had nothing to do with hunger. "The money, it's all gone. The treatments, the medicine. There is nothing left. We have nothing left." She looked at the glorious piano, then at her own rough hands. "The piano was sold 2 years ago. She teaches me on a silent keyboard, by touch, by memory." She gestured weakly to the magnificent instrument before her. "I had to hear it just once. I had to know if it was still real, and we needed to eat." The raw honesty of it stole the breath from the room. This wasn't a sob story. It was a simple, devastating report. Genius, reduced to its most human, desperate need. The Mactor finally found his voice. "A plate of food," he muttered, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. He had been worried about a scene, about a clumsy amateur. Instead, he had presided over the unveiling of a tragedy. The pianist acted. He turned to the Mactor, his professional authority snapping back into place, but charged with a new, fierce purpose. "Get the manager, now, and bring food. A proper meal, not a plate. Bring it to my studio in the West Wing." He then turned to Lena, his manner shifting to one of gentle, unwavering firmness. "You will come with me. You will eat, and then you will tell me everything." Lena looked at him, then at the watching eyes of the wealthy, stunned guests. The shame and the hunger warred in her face. But the pianist did not reach for her hand. He simply gestured toward the staff door, an offer of an escape from the spotlight. "Please," he said. It was the most respectful word he had uttered all evening. Slowly, she picked up her faded coat from the floor. She didn't put it on, just folded it over her arm, holding it like a shield. She gave one last, lingering look at the grand piano, her kingdom, for 5 minutes, then nodded silently. As she followed the pianist across the lobby, the crowd did not applaud again. They watched in a hushed, reverent silence. The giggle that had started this was now a memory that burned with shame in the hearts of those who had shared it. They had not witnessed a beggar's performance. They had witnessed a fallen princess reclaiming her birthright, one heartbreaking note at a time. And the story, they all knew, was far from over. The pianist's studio in the West Wing was not a grand hall, but a small, quiet room tucked away behind the main ballroom. It was a practical space, lined with soundproofing panels and shelves of well-worn sheet music. A smaller, upright piano stood against one wall, its surface cluttered with metronomes and pencils. The air smelled of old paper, wood polish, and dust. He guided Lena inside and closed the door softly, shutting out the stunned gaze of the lobby. For a moment, the only sound was the distant hum of the hotel's heating system. The sudden quiet felt heavier than the noise. "Sit, please," the pianist said, his voice still carrying a tremor. He pulled out a simple wooden chair from a desk piled with scores. Lena sat, placing her folded coat on her lap, her fingers tracing a frayed seam. She looked small and terribly young under the bright fluorescent light of the practice room. The fire that had burned in her at the piano was completely banked, leaving only ash and exhaustion. The pianist didn't sit. He paced a short path in front of the upright piano, his hands clasped behind his back. He was trying to piece together a legend from the fragile reality in front of him. Anya Volkov, he said, the name a whisper of reverence. I was just a student when I heard her. I had snuck into the hall. I could barely afford the standing room ticket. He stopped pacing and looked at Lena, his eyes distant, seeing the past. She played Prokofiev. It was like watching a storm being conducted by a prophet. The power, the control, but also this incredible, heartbreaking tenderness. She was the next great one. Everyone knew it. He leaned against the edge of the piano, facing her. And then, she was gone. The accident in Vienna. The news said she had withdrawn to recover, but she never returned. No one ever saw her again. It was the great mystery of the music world for years. They said she was too proud to return injured. They said she had lost her nerve. Some even said she had died. He paused, his gaze sharpening, focusing on Lena. No one said she had a daughter. Lena kept her eyes on her coat. She wanted to keep me away from all of that, she said softly. From the pressure, the eyes. She said the music was the only thing that mattered, not the circus around it. A soft knock at the door interrupted them. The Master D entered, his stern demeanor completely shattered. He carried a large silver tray himself, not delegating the task to a waiter. On it was a bowl of rich, steaming soup, a plate with a delicate chicken breast, roasted vegetables, a basket of rolls, and a glass of cold milk. He set it carefully on the desk beside Lena, his movements almost ceremonial. Thank you, the pianist said quietly. The Master D merely nodded, his eyes filled with a profound apology he couldn't voice, and retreated, closing the door even more gently than before. The sight of the food made Lena's stomach clench audibly. A faint flush of shame colored her cheeks. She looked at the pianist, a question in her eyes. Eat, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Please, before it gets cold. She didn't need to be told twice. But she didn't devour it. Her manners, even in her hunger, were refined. She picked up the spoon and ate the soup slowly, savoring each warm mouthful. She ate the chicken and vegetables with careful, deliberate bites, as if rediscovering the taste of proper food. She didn't speak until the worst of the hunger's edge was gone. My father was a cellist, she began, her voice a little stronger, fortified by the meal. He was in the orchestra for her tour. That's how they met. A ghost of a smile touched her lips, gone in an instant. He was the steady ground to her sky. When the accident happened, he was driving a truck on an icy road. He didn't make it. The pianist closed his eyes, absorbing the blow of the simple statement. She was in the hospital for months. Lena continued, her voice flat, reciting facts to keep the emotion at bay. Her right arm, it was badly damaged. She could still play, but not like before. Not with the strength, the endurance for the big concertos. The pain was constant. The doctors said she might regain more with more surgeries. But the money, she trailed off, shaking her head. The insurance was a fight. The medical bills ate everything. The recordings, the royalties, it was all gone within a few years. We moved back here, to the city where she grew up. A small apartment. She tried to teach, but students want a teacher who can perform, who has a shining career. A ghost does not attract pupils. Lena picked up a roll, breaking it into small pieces without eating them. She taught me instead. From the time I could sit up, it wasn't a choice. It was like breathing. But we had to sell her piano. It was the last thing of value. We sold it to pay for my school, for the rent, for her medicine. She looked up, her eyes meeting the pianist's. For the last 2 years, we've had a keyboard, one you can plug headphones into. It has no sound of its own. She sits beside me, her left hand demonstrating on the silent keys, her right hand, the weak one, guiding my wrist. She teaches me by singing the notes, by tapping the rhythm on my shoulder, by the feel of it. The image was so vivid, so devastatingly intimate, that the pianist had to turn away. He stared at the silent, upright piano in the room, imagining a world where music was only a vibration in the fingers and a memory in the ear. Why today? He asked, turning back. Why come here, of all places? Lena finished the last of the milk. This hotel. She told me about it. It was one of the first big, beautiful places she ever played as a young student. She won a competition, and the prize was a recital right here in the main lobby. She said she felt like a queen that night. Lena's voice dropped to a whisper. I thought, if I could play where she played, maybe it would feel like she was there with me. And I saw the restaurant, the people eating. I just thought maybe I could trade the only thing I have of any value for the one thing we needed. The Stark. Simple economy of it music for food hung in the air. The pianist finally sank into the chair opposite her, his energy spent. The piece you played, the Chopin. It was her signature piece, you know? Lena nodded. I know. She said it was the story of her life, before everything changed. She taught me every breath of it, and you have her touch, he said, wonder creeping back into his voice. Not just her technique, her soul is in your playing. It's unmistakable. For the first time, Lena's composure fully broke, not into sobs, but a quiet, steady stream of tears that she didn't bother to wipe away. She's getting worse, she confessed, the words torn from her. The pain is worse. The new medicine the doctor suggested. We can't afford it. Not even close. I've been looking for work, but it's hard. I only know how to do one thing. And without a piano, without a degree, without a name anyone remembers, she shrugged. A gesture of utter defeat. The pianist sat forward, his elbows on his knees. Listen to me, he said, his voice low and intense. Your name, Volkov. It is remembered. By the right people. What you did out there tonight, that wasn't just a performance. It was a message in a bottle, and it was heard. He stood up abruptly, a new purpose straightening his spine. You cannot go back to that apartment tonight. Not like this. He saw the flash of protective fear in her eyes. For your mother's sake, as much as yours, you need rest. You need to be strong for her. The hotel has empty rooms. I will speak to the manager. You will stay here tonight, as a guest. Lena began to protest, but he held up a hand. It is already decided. It is the very least that decency demands. He walked to the desk and picked up the now empty tray. In the morning, we will make a plan. A real plan. For your mother's medicine. For everything. He moved towards the door, then paused. Can you play anything else? I mean, something of hers? Something she wrote? Lena looked up, surprised. She hasn't composed in years. Not since. But there is one. A little lullaby she wrote for me when I was small. She called it The Quiet Star. She used to hum it. The pianist's face softened. Tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow, you will play it on a real piano, and we will record it. Just a simple recording. He didn't explain why, but a glimmer of an idea was forming behind his eyes, an idea about legacy and proof, and the power of a story. He opened the door. The Master D was waiting outside, as if standing guard. Please, the pianist said to him. Take her to room 314. See that she has everything she needs. The Master D nodded, his earlier arrogance replaced by a solemn sense of duty. Of course, Lena stood, clutching her coat. She looked from the pianist to the Master D, the world tilting on its axis. An hour ago, she was begging at the gates. Now, she was being escorted to a room in the castle. Thank you, she said to the pianist, the words carrying the weight of more than just the meal or the bed for the night. He simply bowed his head, a musician acknowledging a superior artist. No, he said quietly. Thank you, Lena Volkov, for reminding us what the music is really for. As she followed the Master D down the plush, quiet corridor, the silence felt different. It wasn't the silence of hunger or despair. It was the ringing, resonant silence that comes after a piece of truth has been played. A silence full of potential, waiting for the next note to be written. The hotel room was a world of softness and quiet. After the Master D left, closing the door with a whisper, Lena just stood in the center of the carpet. It was thick and cream-colored. The bed was enormous, piled with pillows and a duvet that looked like a cloud. A large window showed the city lights twinkling far below, a view she had only ever seen from street level. It felt unreal. The silence here was different from the tense quiet of their apartment. This was a wealthy silence, paid for and insulated. She was afraid to touch anything slowly. She took off her worn shoes and placed them neatly by the door. She walked to the bathroom, her socks sinking into the plush carpet. The bathroom was all marble and gleaming chrome. She turned on the tap and hot water came instantly, steaming. She washed her face, the warm water feeling like a luxury she'd forgotten. In the mirror, her reflection looked pale, her eyes dark with exhaustion and the lingering shock of the evening. She didn't get into the big bed right away. Instead, she sat in a comfortable armchair by the window, her knees pulled up to her chest, and watched the city. Her mind was a whirlwind, the feeling of the grand piano's keys under her fingers, the sound of her own music filling that huge space, the stunned faces, the pianist's recognition, her mother's name on his lips. A deep, wrenching worry pushed through everything else. Her mother was alone. She had left a note saying she might be late, But that was hours ago. The old phone in their apartment rarely held a charge, and they had no mobile. A cold knot of guilt tightened in her stomach. She should be there. She had food now. She could bring something back. But the pianist's words echoed. You need to be strong for her. And the truth was, she was so tired. The kind of tired that went down to the bone. The chair was so soft. Her eyes grew heavy, and despite the whirl of thoughts, she drifted into a shallow, fitful sleep right there. Still in her clothes, downstairs, the hotel was not sleeping. The pianist and the hotel manager, a meticulous man in his 50s with a head of silver hair, were in the manager's office. The story had been told. The manager had seen the cell phone videos taken by guests, shaky, awe-filled clips of a shabby girl creating magic at the lobby piano. He had heard the whispered buzz that was now rippling through his elegant hotel. This is not a PR opportunity, the pianist said firmly, his hands on the manager's desk. This is a human obligation. Anya Volkov is ill. The daughter is carrying a weight no young person should have to carry. The manager steepled his fingers. He was a practical man, but not a heartless one. He also understood the powerful narrative now sitting in room 314. We will help, of course, he said, discreetly. A doctor for the mother. We can have our concierge physician visit tomorrow. The hotel can cover the initial consultation. It will be more than a consultation, the pianist insisted. It will be ongoing care, medicine. That is a significant commitment, the manager said slowly. Then he leaned forward. But a story like this, it has value, not to exploit, but to share. It could generate the funds needed for long-term care. A proper fund, the pianist frowned. She is not a performing monkey. She came here for a plate of food, not a charity circus, not a circus. The manager corrected gently. A recital, a single, private event. Here, in the lobby, for a small, invited audience of patrons who would understand what they are witnessing. We call it an evening for a legacy. The proceeds go entirely to a trust for Anya Volkov's medical care and her daughter's future. No one takes a fee. The pianist was silent, considering the idea of putting Lena back on that spot. But this time with expectations and a crowd paying for tickets, felt dangerous. Yet, the manager's idea had a cruel logic. It was the world they lived in. Talent alone was not enough. It needed a story to be seen. And this story, tragically, was perfect. Her mother must be the first priority, the pianist said finally. Before any talk of recitals, we must bring her here, where she can be looked after properly. The girl will not agree to anything until her mother is safe. The manager nodded. Tomorrow, then. First, the doctor. Then, we bring the mother here. We have a suite on the quiet floor that would be suitable. After that, we speak with the daughter. And only with her full agreement. Morning light spilled through the window, warming Lena's face. She woke up stiff, still in the armchair, for a moment completely disoriented by her surroundings. Then it all flooded back. There was a soft knock at the door. It was a young maid with a breakfast trolley. Fresh fruit, yogurt, pastries, and orange juice. Lena ate mechanically, her anxiety growing with every minute. She needed to get home. Just as she finished, another knock. It was the pianist and the hotel manager. The manager introduced himself with a quiet, respectful tone. He explained about the doctor, about their wish to help. Lena's eyes widened with a mix of hope and suspicion. I need to see my mother first. I need to tell her. She'll be scared if strangers come. Of course, the manager said. We will take you. And if she agrees, we will bring her both back here. We have a car ready. The car was a sleek, silent town car. Lena sat in the back, the pianist beside her, as it navigated from the glittering city center into the older, grayer neighborhoods. The buildings grew closer together, the shops more modest. Lena directed the driver down familiar streets, her posture tightening with each turn. They stopped in front of a plain, 4-story brick apartment building. The paint on the door was peeling. Lena led them inside, up to flights of stairs that smelled of cabbage and old wood. She stopped at a door, took a deep breath, and unlocked it. The apartment was small, clean, but shrouded in a profound quiet. The air was cool. In the main room, by the window for light, stood the silent electronic keyboard on a rickety stand. Next to it was a worn armchair. And in the chair, wrapped in a thin blanket, was a woman. She was pale, her face lined with pain and years of quiet struggle. But her eyes, when they looked up, were the same deep brown as Lena's. They held a fierce, intelligent light. This was Anya Volkov. Lena, the woman said, her voice thin but clear with relief. Then she saw the strangers behind her daughter, and a flicker of fear crossed her face. Her right hand, resting on the blanket, twitched slightly. The fingers curled and stiff. "Mama," Lena said, rushing to kneel by the chair. "It's okay. These people, they want to help." The words tumbled out the hotel, the piano, the food, the recognition. As Lena spoke, the pianist watched Anya Volkov. He saw the musician in her still, in the proud set of her head, in the way she listened. When Lena mentioned his name, Anya's gaze shifted to him. She studied him for a long moment. "You were at the Prague masterclass," she said suddenly, her memory sharp as a blade. "You asked a question about the pedal in the Schubert impromptu. You were very earnest." The pianist felt a jolt. He had forgotten that himself. "You remember." "I remember everything about the piano," she said simply. Then her expression clouded with maternal concern, looking back at Lena. "You played in public." "I had to," Lena whispered. Anya reached out with her left hand, the strong one, and cupped her daughter's cheek. "I know," she said, her voice thick. "I am so sorry you had to." The hotel manager stepped forward slightly, introducing himself with a deep deference. He outlined their offer: a doctor, a comfortable suite at the hotel, a chance for proper rest and assessment. Anya Volkov looked from her daughter's hopeful, desperate face to the two men, pride warred with practicality, with the sheer exhaustion of the fight. She looked around the tiny, sunless room, then at her daughter's threadbare sweater. The fight left her in a slow sigh. "For Lena," she said finally, not for herself. "We will come." The move was a blur of quiet efficiency. The hotel staff packed a few meager belongings with more care than Lena had ever seen anyone give their things. Anya was helped gently down the stairs and into the waiting car. A blanket wrapped around her shoulders. An hour later, they were in a bright, airy suite at the Grand. Sun streamed through large windows. A real bed for Anya was set up in the main room. She was settled in it, looking small and bewildered by the softness. The concierge doctor arrived, a kind, older woman. She examined Anya in the bedroom with the door closed. Lena paced the sitting room, her arms wrapped tightly around herself. When the doctor emerged, her face was serious but not hopeless. "The arm is a chronic situation," she told Lena and the pianist quietly. "There is nerve damage, arthritis. We cannot undo it, but the pain can be managed far better than it is. There are new, non-invasive therapies, specific medications. She is also weak from poor nutrition and stress. With proper care, her quality of life can improve greatly, but it will require consistent treatment." Lena nodded, absorbing the "can" and "the will require," words that meant money. Later, when Anya was resting, the manager and the pianist sat with Lena in the sitting room. The manager carefully laid out the idea of the private recital. "It would be one night. You play what you wish. The money from the tickets goes into a trust fund that a lawyer will set up. It pays for your mother's treatments, for your future, for your education if you want it. No one can touch it for anything else." Lena looked toward the closed bedroom door. "She wouldn't want pity." "This wouldn't be pity," the pianist said gently. "It would be an exchange. You give them beauty, something only you can give. They give you, in return, the means to take care of your mother. It is." The week that followed was a strange, suspended dream for Lena and her mother. The hotel suite became a quiet sanctuary. Sunlight, real and abundant, became a new kind of medicine. The concierge doctor came daily, and new treatments began. Gentle physiotherapy for her mother's arm, small white pills that took the sharpest edge off the pain. Color began to return to her mother's cheeks, not much, but a hint. It was the color of rest. Lena spent hours each day in the pianist's studio, but not practicing in the frantic way she was used to. This was different. The old pianist was no longer a hotel employee listening to a beggar. He was a colleague, a guide. They worked on pacing, on breath between phrases. He didn't try to change her style. The ghost of her mother's voice in her playing was the whole point, but he helped her shape it for the space of the grand lobby. "It's not a concert hall," he told her. "It's a room full of whispers and crystal. You have to draw them in, not blast them back." He taught her about the acoustics, about how to make the soft notes. Travel. She would return to the suite, and her mother would be waiting, propped up on pillows. "How did it go?" she'd ask, and Lena would sit on the edge of the bed and tell her about the phrasing of the Debussy, or the powerful left-hand octaves in the Beethoven. They talked music as they hadn't been able to in years. It was their language, and in this safe place, they could finally speak it freely again. The hotel manager was a man of his word. He worked discreetly, A trusted lawyer drew up the papers for a trust. Invitations were sent, not to the biggest names in society, but to a curated list: retired music critics, serious patrons of the arts, a few wealthy families known for their quiet philanthropy, and of course, every guest who had been in the lobby that first fateful night. The invitation was simple: an evening for a legacy. It mentioned no names, only the cause. The response was immediate. Every seat was claimed. The night arrived. The lobby had been transformed. The usual armchairs were arranged in neat rows. The grand piano stood under a soft, focused spotlight, a single vase of white lilies on its lid. The air buzzed with a low, expectant hum. The guests who had been there that first night spoke in hushed, reverent tones to the newcomers, telling the story of the girl and the plate of food. In the suite upstairs, Lena was dressed in a simple, dark blue dress provided by the hotel. It was elegant but plain, nothing that would distract. She looked at herself in the mirror, a stranger staring back. Her mother was in a wheelchair, a warm shawl around her shoulders. She looked frail but alert, her eyes bright. "You are ready," her mother said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'm scared," Lena admitted, her hands cold. "Good," her mother replied with a small, knowing smile. "The fear is the fuel. It means you care. Now, go and turn it into light." Downstairs, the lobby was full. The pianist, acting as host, walked to the center of the space. He didn't need a microphone. The room fell silent. "Good evening," he began, his voice carrying easily. "You are here because you heard a rumor, a story that seemed too extraordinary to be true. Tonight, you will hear the truth. But first, you must understand where the music comes from." He gestured to the side of the room. "It is my profound honor to present, first, not the performer, but the inspiration, the legacy herself." All heads turned. The Mactor D, his face solemn with pride, gently wheeled Anya Volkov into the edge of the lighted area. A gasp. Then a wave of murmurs rippled through the crowd. The older ones recognized her, even changed by time and pain. The younger ones saw the legend made flesh. Anya did not smile. She simply nodded once. A queen acknowledging her subjects. Her gaze found her daughter, who stood waiting in the shadows by the piano. She gave a slow, almost imperceptible nod. Lena walked into the light. She saw none of the faces, just a blur. She saw only the piano and her mother's eyes. She sat. She placed her hands on the keys, closed her eyes for a moment, and began, not with a famous concerto, but with a simple, haunting melody. It was the quiet star. The notes were gentle, a lullaby, but they held within them a universe of love and loss. It was a mother's song for her child, composed in a time of joy, now played in a time of trial. Lena played it exactly as she remembered it being hummed, with a fragile, singing tone that made the large room feel as intimate as a nursery. When the last note faded, there was not a sound. Many in the audience had tears on their cheeks. Without a pause, Lena shifted her hands. The opening notes of Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor filled the silence. This was the piece that had started it all. But tonight, it was different. The desperation was gone. In its place was a powerful, controlled narrative. It was still passionate, still wild in places, but it was no longer a cry for help. It was a declaration of strength. She played it for her mother, for the journey they had survived. The technical brilliance was still there, blindingly so, but it was now in service to a story of resilience. She played to more pieces, a luminous, flowing piece by Debussy that shimmered like light on water, and finally, a powerful, rhythmic piece by a modern composer that showed the raw power and precision in her hands. Each piece was a different color, a different emotion. When her hands lifted from the keys after the final, thunderous chord, the silence was absolute for 3 full heartbeats. Then, the audience erupted. They didn't just applaud, they rose as one, a forest of people coming to their feet. The sound was a physical wave of approval, respect, and awe. There was no giggling now, no condescension. This was a tribute. Lena, breathing heavily, stood and bowed slightly. But then she turned her back to the audience. She walked not off the stage, but towards her mother. She knelt by the wheelchair and took her mother's left hand in both of hers. The applause redoubled. Understanding the gesture, the pianist had to step forward, raising his hands for quiet. It took a long time for the room to settle. "The legacy you heard tonight," he said, his own voice thick with emotion, "is not just in the past. It is alive. It is a future. All proceeds from this evening are secured in a trust for the care of Anya Volkov and the future of her daughter, the artist you have just heard." He paused, letting it sink in. This is not charity. This is an investment in beauty. Thank you. The evening did not end with the performance. A quiet reception followed. People didn't mob Lena. They approached her and her mother with a kind of respectful distance, offering quiet words of thanks, sharing their own memories of Enya's past performances. A retired critic, his hands trembling, told Anya that her recording of the Rachmaninoff had been the soundtrack to his youth. A wealthy couple, without fanfare, handed the hotel manager a check far exceeding the ticket price, whispering, "For the trust." Later, back in the suite, the quiet returned. The wheelchair was by the window. Anya was looking out at the city lights, her daughter standing beside her. "You were magnificent," Anya said, not turning her head. "Not just the playing, the choice, the quiet star first. It was perfect. You made them see me, not as a tragedy, but as a composer, a mother. You gave me back my dignity." Lena put a hand on her mother's thin shoulder. "You never lost it. So, what happens now?" her mother asked, the practical worry creeping back in. Lena smiled, a real, relaxed smile that touched her eyes. "Now, you get better. The doctor says with the treatments, you could have less pain. Maybe even play a little. For yourself. And I have choices." She looked at her hands. "The pianist says there is a conservatory that would be interested. A real school. And the manager, he said people are already asking if I would play here. Once a month, a proper engagement, with a salary." Anya reached up and covered her daughter's hand with her own. "A salary," she repeated, the words sounding like a foreign, beautiful concept. For playing, Lena confirmed. They stayed at the Grand for another 2 weeks. Until her mother was strong enough, they did not go back to the old apartment. With the first funds from the trust, they moved into a clean, bright, ground-floor apartment, chosen for its easy access and a small sunroom, where an upright piano now sat, a real one, a gift from the hotel staff and the pianist, who had all contributed. Lena enrolled in the conservatory. She played her monthly evenings at the Grand, which became the hottest ticket in the city, known for their profound emotional power. The story of the girl who played for a plate of food became legend, but she was no longer that girl. One afternoon, months later, Lena came home from classes. Her mother was in the sunroom. She wasn't in her chair. She was sitting at the upright piano. Her right hand rested gently on the keys, not playing, just touching. With her strong left hand, she was picking out the simple, single-line melody of the quiet star. It was halting, but it was music. Lena stopped in the doorway, listening. She didn't say a word. She just leaned against the frame, watching the sunlight fall across her mother's face and the piano keys. The sound was not concert quality. It was not powerful or brilliant, but it was, for the first time in a very long time, the sound of peace, and for both of them, that was the most beautiful music in the world.